The moment my female CEO laughed at me for wanting the department head role, I knew my career at that company had already ended. I was standing across from her desk, hands folded, voice steady. "The position has been vacant for almost a year," I said. "I've been covering the responsibilities informally. If the company needs someone to step in officially, I'm ready." She didn't look at my proposal. She leaned back and laughed. Not a polite laugh, not awkward, a real one. "How old are you again?" she asked. 49, I answered. She smiled, still amused. "Right. Maybe it's time to start thinking about early retirement." The room went quiet. No follow-up questions. No discussion about results or experience. Just that sentence, hanging in the air like a verdict. I waited. Maybe she would clarify. Maybe she would soften it. She didn't. Instead, she added, "Department heads need energy. People who are still building something, not maintaining." Maintaining 16 years of growth, crisis management, and mentorship reduced to a word. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I understood. The conversation was already over, in her eyes. I wasn't a future investment. I was a cost that hadn't been trimmed yet. "I see," I said. She glanced back at her screen. "Good. I'm glad we're aligned." Aligned. That was the word she chose. I walked out of her office without raising my voice, without defending myself. The hallway felt longer than usual, but I didn't slow down. Something had shifted. Cleanly and permanently. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Clear that I had just been told exactly where I stood. Clear that loyalty meant nothing once you stopped fitting the image. Clear that staying any longer would only teach them how much disrespect I was willing to tolerate. By the time I sat back down at my desk, I already knew what I was going to do next. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't even admitted the possibility before that morning. But once someone laughs at the years you gave them, the decision makes itself. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. While inspired by real workplace dynamics and emotional truths, all characters, companies, and events are imagined for storytelling purposes. Each story carries its own message about dignity, self-worth, and the cost of underestimating someone who has quietly carried more than they were ever credited for. Why does the hardest work so often arrive without a title? By the time I left the CEO's office, I had already been doing the department head's job for almost 8 months. No announcement, no paperwork, just a quiet assumption that I would handle it. "Hazel, can you run the meeting?" Mark from operations had said one morning, poking his head into my office. "She still hasn't named a replacement." I ran it. When a client threatened to walk because a deadline slipped, my phone rang. "Hazel, we need you." Finance said, "You're the only one who understands how all the teams connect." I fixed it. New hires were sent to my desk without explanation. "They said you'd explain how things actually work," a junior analyst told me. Pulling up a chair, I explained. I always did. One afternoon, after a particularly tense cross-department call, my colleague Dana leaned over and lowered her voice. "You realize you're already the department head, right? Except for the title." I said, "And the pay," she added quietly. The irony sat heavy between us. I was trusted to calm conflicts, train managers, and absorb pressure from every direction. Yet when it came time to acknowledge that responsibility, the room suddenly went silent. During one budget review, I spoke up. "If we restructure this workflow, we can save weeks every quarter," I said. The CEO nodded absently. "Good suggestion. Let's move on." Later, the same idea came out of her mouth in a board meeting. This time, it was called leadership. I never asked for the role because I wanted power. I asked because the work was already mine, and pretending otherwise had started to feel dishonest. The company was comfortable letting me carry the weight as long as I did it quietly. That was the unspoken agreement. I would lead without authority. They would benefit without commitment. And the moment I tried to name what I had already been doing, they laughed. I sat at my desk that afternoon, unread messages piling up, and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, recognition. The kind that arrives when a pattern finally makes sense. I stopped opening my calendar and closed my inbox instead. What kind of leader laughs instead of listening? I replayed the meeting in my head all afternoon, not because I doubted what I heard, but because I finally understood why it sounded so practiced. "You're good at what you do," the CEO had said, still smiling. No one's denying that. I had nodded. Then I don't understand why stepping into the role is an issue. She folded her arms. Hazel, experience is valuable, but too much of it becomes inertia. Inertia, I repeated. Yes, she said. Energy matters more at that level. Momentum. People who want to build, not just maintain. I've been building this department for years, I said quietly. She tilted her head, the smile returning. You're reliable, and reliable people are essential. But they don't usually change roles. That was the moment it clicked. Reliable wasn't a compliment. It was a boundary. So reliability disqualifies me, I said. She laughed again. Softer this time. Don't be defensive. I'm trying to protect you. From what I asked. From disappointment, she replied. From pushing too hard at this stage of your career. This stage, not my skills. Not my results. My stage. She glanced at the clock. You should be grateful, Hazel. A lot of companies would have already made tougher decisions. Tougher than laughing at me, I asked. She didn't answer that. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. We value what you bring. Just not in that capacity. Value. Another word that sounded generous until you listened closely. As I gathered my papers, she added, almost kindly. Stability is rare these days. You have it here. Don't underestimate that. I walked out knowing the laughter hadn't been spontaneous. It was rehearsed, reinforced, and rewarded. This wasn't one woman's bias. It was a system that smiled while it kept you in place. By the time I reached my desk, I stopped telling myself I had been misunderstood. I had been understood perfectly. Why does no one speak up when the laughter isn't funny? I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, my screen filled with messages that had nothing to do with what had just happened. Hazel, can you review this before the call? Hazel, the client's pushing back again. Hazel, quick question when you have a minute. I answered none of them. Mark walked past my desk and slowed, then kept going. Dana glanced up, met my eyes for half a second, then looked away. The room sounded the same as always: keyboards, muted calls, low voices, but something underneath it had shifted. A few minutes later, someone stopped beside me. It was Claire from compliance, new enough to still look uncertain when she spoke. I heard, she said softly. Heard what I asked. She hesitated. The meeting. I waited. I'm sorry, she whispered, then added quickly, I really am. Before I could respond, she walked away. That was it. No outrage, no follow-up. Just sympathy delivered quietly, like an apology for existing in the same space. Dana eventually rolled her chair closer. She didn't look at me when she spoke. They won't back you, she said, not openly. I know, I replied. They need you where you are, she continued. If you move up, someone else has to carry what you carry. And if I don't move at all, I asked. She exhaled. Then nothing changes. Her honesty hurt more than the CEO's laughter. At least the laughter was obvious. This was practical. The realization settled slowly. Silence wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. Everyone benefited from things staying exactly the way they were. My reliability made their jobs easier. My presence absorbed risk. My voice, as long as it stayed within approved limits, was useful. Defending me would cost them something. Staying quiet cost them nothing. My phone buzzed again. Hazel, are you joining the 2 o'clock? I turned it face down. Staying meant agreeing to be invisible in exchange for stability, not just today, not just this role, permanently. I leaned back and let the quiet do its work. What if the real reason you stay is fear? I didn't go home right away that evening. I stayed at my desk long after most people left, not working, just sitting there with my thoughts finally loud enough to hear. You're being dramatic, I told myself quietly. You have a steady job, health insurance, a paycheck that arrives on time. Another voice answered back, sharper than I expected. And how much dignity does that paycheck buy? I closed my eyes and heard the CEO again. Maybe it's time to think about early retirement. Earlier, the words had stung. Now they sounded different, clearer. You're afraid, I said under my breath, of starting over, of being the oldest person in the room, of proving her right. I thought about the years I had stayed because leaving felt reckless. About telling myself that stability was a virtue, that loyalty would eventually matter, about choosing predictability over pride, again and again. 49 isn't old, I said. But it's old enough to know when you're being managed out. The silence answered me. I opened my calendar and scrolled back through months of meetings I had led without credit. Crises I had resolved without acknowledgement. You didn't stay because they valued you, I said quietly. You stayed because you were scared to test your value somewhere else. That realization didn't hurt the way the laughter had. It settled, solid, unavoidable. The insult from that morning replayed once more. But this time it didn't tighten my chest. It straightened my spine. Early retirement, I said aloud, tasting the words, or maybe early honesty. I gathered my bag and stood. Not with urgency. With resolve. Fear had been making my decisions for a long time, dressing itself up as patience and responsibility. Now that I could see it clearly, it felt smaller, manageable. As I shut down my computer, my phone lit up with another message asking for help on a project due tomorrow. I didn't answer it. I slipped the phone into my bag instead. For the first time in years, I walked out without explaining myself. What if the opportunity was already there, waiting quietly for me to stop pretending I didn't see it? I found the message that night while scrolling through my old LinkedIn inbox. It was buried under years of unanswered notifications, dated almost 2 years back. Hazel, if you're ever open to a conversation about leadership roles in New York, I'd love to talk. We've been following your work. I remembered reading it the first time. Remembered closing the app and telling myself, I'm not that person. I don't jump ship. Loyalty had felt like integrity back then. I stared at the name again. Ethan Moore, executive director at a competing firm in New York. We had met once at a conference. He had asked real questions, listened without interrupting. I had noticed that even then. I locked my phone and sat with it for a moment. This isn't revenge, I said quietly to myself. This is information. I unlocked the screen and hit call before I could talk myself out of it. It rang twice. Ethan Moore, he answered. This is Hazel Carter, I said. I'm not sure if you remember me. There was a brief pause, then a smile in his voice. Of course I do. I wondered when you'd call. I ignored your message, I said. I shouldn't have. You were loyal, he replied. That told us something too. I swallowed. I'm not calling to complain. I'm calling to ask if the conversation still makes sense. It does, he said immediately. We've followed your department restructures and crisis turnarounds for years. Your name comes up often. My name, I repeated, not your age, he added, as if reading my mind. Your work. We talked for 15 minutes. No flattery, no vague promises, just questions about teams, pressure, accountability. When we hung up, my hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, from recognition. I set the phone down and sat very still. For the first time since that laugh in the CEO's office, the future didn't feel like something I had missed. It felt like something that had been waiting. What does it feel like to finally be evaluated on merit? Ethan met me in a quiet conference room the next morning. He didn't open with pleasantries. Tell me how you'd stabilize a team that's lost 3 managers in 6 months, he said. I'd start by stopping the churn, I replied. Clear priorities, fewer emergency pivots. Let people finish what they start. He nodded. And when the board wants results in 90 days, then we choose what to disappoint, I said. Because pretending everything is urgent is how you burn people out. A woman across the table. Lena, operations lead, leaned forward. What would you change first? Decision rights, I said. If no one knows who owns the call, everyone hesitates. Ethan didn't glance at my resume. He slid it aside. Good. Let's talk reality. The New York branch is our largest, he said. It's also the messiest. Revenue is strong. Culture is fractured. I'm not interested in fixing optics, I said. I fix systems. That's why you're here, Lena replied. Ethan folded his hands. Director role. Full authority over the branch. You'll inherit a team that's tired and skeptical. Pressure doesn't scare me, I said. Ambiguity does. You won't have much of that, he said, but you'll have resistance. Then they'll get consistency, I said. That usually quiets resistance. He smiled once. We need leadership, not rescue. I held his gaze. Then don't rescue me. He nodded. Good, Lena added. We expect long hours at first. I expect honesty, I said. That's how this works. Ethan pushed a folder toward me. We'll formalize after you think it through. No rush. I stood steady. There is a rush. Not on your end. On mine. Outside the room. He stopped me. One thing, he said. This won't be easy. I'm not looking for easy, I replied. I'm looking for meaningful. I walked away knowing this wasn't an escape. It was an appointment. What does power sound like when it's afraid? I handed in my resignation the next morning. No speech, no explanation, just a single page, printed, signed, and placed on the CEO's desk. She looked at it, then up at me. There was no laughter this time. Is this a negotiation tactic? She asked. No, I said. It's notice. She stood slowly. We can revisit the conversation we had. There's nothing to revisit, I replied. She circled the desk, voice shifting into something careful. Hazel, let's be practical. You're valuable. We can make adjustments. Adjustments to what I asked. Title, scope, compensation, she said quickly. We could formalize the department head role, effective immediately. I didn't respond. She continued. There's room to increase your package, and a path forward. You don't need to throw away everything you've built here. I met her eyes. I didn't build this alone. I just carried more of it than you wanted to see. Her jaw tightened. You're reacting emotionally. I'm reacting accurately, I said. She exhaled. I didn't think you'd actually leave. That was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. You told me to think about early retirement, I replied. I thought about it. I decided to retire from being invisible. Her voice sharpened. This industry isn't forgiving to people who start over at your age. I'm not starting over, I said. I'm continuing somewhere else. She hesitated. Is this about New York? I didn't confirm it. I didn't need to. We could match whatever they're offering, she said. We can fix this. I picked up my copy of the letter. You can't fix something you never respected. Silence filled the space between us. Not the awkward kind. The final kind. As I turned to leave, she spoke once more. You're making a mistake. I paused at the door. No, I said evenly. I waited too long to stop making one. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. What happens when experience walks out the door? My first week in New York moved fast. No welcome speeches, no easing in. Half the team doesn't trust leadership, Lena told me during our first check-in. They've seen too many plans die halfway through. Then we won't sell plans, I said. We'll make decisions and stand by them. She nodded. That'll be new. While I was settling in, the updates from Boston came quietly, through people who used to call me for help. They missed the delivery window, Mark said over the phone one night. No one caught the dependency. Who signed off? I asked. Silence. Then, no one wanted to. A week later, Dana texted. 3 managers resigned. Same week. I stared at the message, then put my phone down. I didn't call anyone back. The first audit happened shortly after. Claire mentioned it in passing when we crossed paths at an industry event. The board's reviewing operational gaps, she said, carefully. They're asking questions about what I asked, about why so much knowledge walked out with one person. I said nothing. A few days later, Ethan mentioned it during a late call. Your former CEO's authority has been restricted. Restricted how? I asked. She needs board approval for major decisions now, he said. Temporary, they claim. I pictured her across a long table, explaining delays to men and women older than both of us combined. People who didn't smile when things went wrong. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. The final update came from Dana again. She has to present every week now. No more solo calls. I closed the message. Back in my office, Lena knocked lightly. They're responding well to the new structure, she said. Fewer emergencies, more ownership. Good I replied. That means it's working. What happened in Boston wasn't revenge, it was gravity. Systems reveal what people try to hide. And once the weight shifts, no one needs to announce the fall. What if the best response to disrespect is success without permission? By my 3rd month in New York, the noise had settled. Not because the work became easier, but because the team stopped bracing for chaos. Just tell us what you want decided, Lena said during one leadership sync. We're tired of guessing. You'll never have to guess, I replied. If I ask for something, it's because I've already thought through the cost. That became the rule. Decisions had owners, deadlines had reasons. People stopped whispering and started speaking plainly. One afternoon, a senior manager named Thomas stayed behind after a meeting. I've worked under 6 directors, he said. You're the first one who doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable. I don't believe in leading from a distance. I told him. It shows. He said, people trust you. That word followed me more than any title ever had. The last update from Boston reached me quietly. The way real endings usually do, Dana called once, voice low. She's been moved out of day-to-day control, she said. Still there, just contained. No announcement, I asked. No, Dana replied. Just fewer decisions, fewer rooms she's allowed in. I thanked her and ended the call. There was no relief in me, no sense of victory, just closure. That evening, my team gathered for a brief check-in. No speeches were needed. We're stable, Lena said. Clients noticed. Good, I replied. Stability is earned. After they left, I sat alone for a moment, not replaying the laughter from months ago, but acknowledging what it had given me: clarity, movement, a line I would never step back across. Here is the lesson I carry now, and the one I want you to hear clearly: loyalty without respect is not virtue. It is self-neglect. No job, no title, no promise of stability is worth shrinking yourself to stay comfortable. The moment someone shows you that your years no longer matter to them, believe them and act accordingly. I did not retire. I moved forward. The moment the CEO's son smiled and called me outdated, I knew my seat was already gone. I think this company needs a fresh wind, Damien said, leaning forward with practiced ease. Something younger, faster, less attached to things that are slowly fading. No one interrupted him. I had been chief operating officer for 15 years. I had built the operational backbone that carried a $5 billion enterprise through acquisitions, regulatory storms, and more than one near collapse. Yet in that room, my history felt strangely irrelevant. Damien continued, voice smooth, confident. Innovation doesn't wait, respectfully. Some leadership styles belong to another era. A few board members nodded, not aggressively, carefully, as if they had rehearsed restraint. I glanced toward Nicholas, his father, the CEO. He studied the table instead of my face. I'll be the fresh wind, Damien added, smiling wider. I can take this company where it needs to go next. That was when I spoke. With that much confidence, I said evenly, there's no reason to say no. The relief in the room was immediate. Someone exhaled. Someone else shifted in their chair. They thought I had surrendered. Damien looked pleased. I appreciate your openness, Marjane. I nodded once. I appreciate clarity. The board chair cleared her throat. Then we're aligned on the transition framework. Aligned. Such a clean word for displacement. I watched hands move. Notes were taken. No vote was called. No debate invited. This was not a discussion. It was a performance. And Damien had already been cast. As the meeting adjourned, a director brushed past me and whispered. They wanted it to look cooperative. I gathered my papers slowly. I wanted them to see that my hands were steady. They mistook composure for consent. What they didn't understand was that I was listening, not agreeing. And once you understand how a decision was made, you also understand how it will unravel. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. While inspired by common workplace power struggles and corporate dynamics, all characters, companies, and events are fictional. This narrative is meant to explore themes of dignity, accountability, and quiet resilience, reminding us that true authority is earned through responsibility, not inherited through titles. Why do powerful people feel safer when you appear to accept your own erasure? The hallway outside the boardroom felt quieter than it should have. Conversations restarted in low, careful tones, the kind people use when they believe the outcome is settled. Nicholas walked beside me for a few steps. Not once did he look in my direction. Good meeting, he said to no one in particular. I stopped walking. If you're going to pretend this was spontaneous, I said, at least have the decency to look at me while you do it. He hesitated, then turned. His smile was thin. This isn't personal, Marjane. It never is, I replied, until it is. He glanced down the corridor, checking who might be close enough to hear. The board wants continuity without turbulence. Damien fits the narrative they need right now. Narrative, I repeated, not capability. His jaw tightened. We're under pressure, so am I said. The difference is, I don't confuse pressure with permission. He said nothing. Then he nodded once and walked away. I gathered my bag and headed toward my office. Halfway there, someone fell into step beside me. Ellen Rhodes, one of the independent directors. She had joined the board 2 years earlier, a former operations executive who still understood how real companies worked. They wanted it to look cooperative, she said quietly. I didn't slow down. How long has this been decided? She exhaled. Since the investor dinner in New York. Damien convinced them the company needed a generational reset. And I voted to delay, she said. That didn't last long. We stopped outside my door. She lowered her voice further. They want a clean transition story, no conflict, no internal dissent. I noticed, I said. Her eyes held mine. Be careful. If you push back publicly, they'll frame it as resistance to change. I've never resisted change, I said. I resist incompetence. A faint smile crossed her face, then disappeared. That distinction doesn't photograph well. After she left, I sat at my desk and opened my calendar. Meetings were already being reassigned, committees renamed, access permissions adjusted with quiet efficiency. This had not been a reaction, it had been preparation, and they believed my silence meant agreement. How do you remove someone indispensable without admitting they are indispensable? The call came the next morning, not from Nicholas, not from Damien, from human resources. Marjane, said a calm voice I barely recognized. This isn't disciplinary. We want to be very clear about that. Then be clear, I replied. Why am I on this call instead of in my meetings? There was a pause. The sound of papers being aligned. The board believes a short step back would support organizational stability during the transition. Stability, I repeated. That word seems popular this week. It's about future readiness, she continued, unfazed. The company is entering a new phase. I built the systems that made that phase possible. I said, you're not worried about readiness. You're worried about optics. Another pause. This one longer. You'll be placed on temporary leave, she said carefully, with full compensation. This protects everyone except me, I said. Later that afternoon, I joined a video call with 2 board members and Nicholas. Damien was not present, which told me everything I needed to know. We want to avoid unnecessary noise, said Charles Myers, a longtime investor representative. Markets are sensitive right now. Your investors already heard Damien's version, I said. This is about keeping the story clean. Nicholas finally spoke. Marjane, this isn't a removal. It's a pause. A pause with my access revoked, I said. My committees reassigned. My calendar wiped. Charles leaned forward. You're still valued. But Damien has momentum with the investment community. They see him as the future. I see. I said. So I'm the past. No one said that, Nicholas replied quickly. You didn't have to, I said. Your silence did the work. The call ended without resolution. No argument, no apology. Just decisions framed as care. That evening, I received a media briefing draft from communications. It described a seamless leadership evolution and praised my legacy contributions. I closed the file without responding. Temporary, they called it. What survives when titles disappear, but responsibility does not. I joined the company when it was still arguing with itself about what it wanted to be. Nicholas hired me after a meeting that ended with him saying, I don't need another presenter. I need someone who can make this thing stop breaking. On my first week, a senior manager waved a deck at me and said, This explains the workflow. It explains how you wish it worked. I said, Show me the logs. He frowned. We don't keep them that clean. We will, I replied, or we'll never know why things fail. That was how it started. I didn't redesign titles or branding. I redesigned consequences. Every change left a trace. Every approval required a second set of eyes. Every shortcut came with a written risk that someone had to sign their name to. A year later, a client threatened to walk after a routing failure cost them a week of production. Their operations director flew in furious. I don't want promises, she said across the table. I want to know who owns this. I do, I told her. And here is how we prevent it from happening again. She studied the audit trail I put in front of her, then the compliance checklist. If I call you at midnight, will you answer? Yes, I said, and I'll know where to look. They renewed for 5 years. Those conversations repeated themselves. Different cities, different executives, same ending. Trust built not on charm, but on proof. When Damien started talking about acceleration and disruption, he never mentioned the controls underneath. He didn't know the names of the safeguards because he had never needed them. I wasn't proud of my title. I was proud of the fact that when something went wrong, there was always a record of why. As I sat alone that evening, reviewing access changes already made in my absence, one truth settled quietly and firmly. A system doesn't forget who built it. How much damage can confidence cause when it replaces caution? I found out Damien had begun accelerating deployments when my phone rang after midnight. It was Lena Ortiz, our compliance manager. She never called that late unless something was wrong. He moved the release window up, she said, skipping pleasantries. Cut 2 testing stages. Which ones? I asked. Regression and load verification. I closed my eyes. Who approved it? There was a pause. He did. The next morning, Damien sent a company-wide update, proud to announce faster cycles. He wrote, "We're removing unnecessary friction." An hour later, an investor note circulated praising his decisiveness. The language sounded familiar. I opened the attachment. It was a summary of throughput gains I had completed 3 weeks earlier. Back when my access still worked, the charts were mine. The conclusions were mine. Only the signature had changed. I forwarded it to Damien. These optimizations were already in place. He replied within minutes. Yes, but I packaged them for impact. Lena stopped by my office later that day. She stood in the doorway, not sitting. He wants me to sign off retroactively, she said. Says it's just procedural. It isn't, I said. If you sign, you own the risk. She swallowed. He implied my team was slowing the company down. That's how pressure works. I said, it pretends urgency is courage. By the end of the week, the first warning appeared. A minor routing delay, then a reconciliation mismatch that corrected itself after a restart. Small things. Easy to dismiss. Damien dismissed them loudly. Legacy noise, he said in a meeting I joined remotely. We're moving past it. I spoke once. Those checks exist because they catch patterns before they cascade. He smiled at the screen. Respectfully, Marjane. Speed is the pattern now. No one challenged him, not publicly. That evening, Lena emailed me the approval trail. It showed gaps where signatures should have been, timestamps compressed beyond policy. She added one line at the bottom, I did not sign. I saved the file and labeled it carefully. When confidence starts replacing caution, it leaves fingerprints. Why do organizations ignore warnings until they become headlines? The first real break didn't make the news. It barely made the internal dashboard. A distribution sync failed just after dawn, freezing orders for 11 minutes. The system recovered on its own, but only because a fallback module I had designed years earlier rerouted traffic before the queue overloaded. Damien called it a win. In the afternoon leadership call, he smiled and said, "We hit turbulence and adjusted in real time. That's agility." Several executives nodded. I spoke calmly. The fallback triggered because a validation layer was bypassed. That layer was removed last week. Damien waved it off. Legacy redundancy. We're proving we don't need it. After the call, an internal memo went out praising his decisive leadership under pressure. The language was generous. It also rewrote cause and effect. I spent the next hour documenting what had happened. I attached logs, timestamps, and the approval trail showing which controls had been skipped. I submitted it through the governance channel we had built for exactly this reason. The response came the next morning from Operations Strategy. Thank you for your input. At this stage, leadership is aligned on moving forward. Aligned. Again. Later that day, Nicholas stopped by my office. He didn't sit. They think you're pushing back because you're hurt, he said. I'm pushing back because the system is being stressed beyond design, I replied. Those controls exist for a reason, he sighed. Damien needs room to lead. Leadership doesn't require removing safeguards, I said. It requires understanding them. Nicholas looked tired. Let's not turn this into a standoff, I nodded. Then don't frame evidence as resistance. He left without responding. That evening, Lena forwarded me a screenshot of the internal praise email. At the bottom, she added a note. They called this success. I archived the message alongside my report. Every warning was now timestamped, routed, and acknowledged. The record was growing, even if the room stayed quiet. When systems fail, who pays for the decisions made at the top? The outage began before sunrise and spread faster than the alerts could keep up. Orders stalled. Tracking froze. Client support lines flooded within minutes. Damien called an emergency briefing. "This is exactly what happens when you rely on legacy architecture," he said, voice sharp with certainty. "We inherited fragility." I unmuted. "The failure occurred in the new routing layer added last week. The legacy safeguards were bypassed." He didn't look at the data I shared. "Those safeguards slowed us down." This proves my point. Within an hour, clients were on the line. One operations director spoke without preamble. "We missed shipments across 3 facilities. Who owns this?" Damien answered before anyone else could. "We're correcting issues rooted in old design choices." The word old landed where it was meant to. That afternoon, the board convened without me. I was informed afterward by email. To reduce confusion during remediation, it read, "Marjane will remain distanced from day-to-day operations." I called Nicholas immediately. "You know that's not accurate." He exhaled. "They need a clean message. A clean message that points away from the decision-maker," I said, "and toward me." "Your absence created uncertainty," he replied, not meeting my eyes when we spoke in person. "That's how they're framing it." I submitted warnings. I said, "They were acknowledged." He nodded once. Acknowledged isn't the same as followed. The next client call was colder. "We were told this disruption stemmed from legacy processes." A procurement lead said, "Is that true?" I chose my words carefully. "The system performed exactly as designed until new changes removed critical checks." There was a pause. "Then why are we hearing your name attached to the failure?" "Because it was useful," I thought. "Because it redirected blame without admitting error." By evening, my access was fully revoked. My calendar emptied. My inbox fell silent. The company had erased my role, but not my shadow. What does loyalty cost when it's demanded instead of earned? Nicholas asked me to meet him after hours. He didn't call it a meeting. He said he needed a favor. "I want you back," he said as soon as we sat down. "Not officially, just long enough to stabilize things." "Stabilize?" I repeated. "You mean fix what your son broke?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Damien is under extraordinary pressure. The board is nervous. Clients are restless. If you step in quietly, we can get through this." "Quietly?" I said. "Without a title, without authority, without accountability." "You don't need any of that," he replied. "You just need to help." I watched his hands as he spoke. They were shaking. "You're asking me to do the work while he keeps the credit," I said. "And when it works, he's the visionary. When it fails, I'm the legacy problem." He didn't deny it. "This isn't about credit, it's about the company." "It stopped being about the company when truth became inconvenient," I said. Nicholas rubbed his forehead. "If this blows up publicly, it will destroy him." "He is not a child," I said. "He chose to lead. He's my son," Nicholas said, finally meeting my eyes. "And you're the only one who can prevent lasting damage." I let the silence sit between us. "You taught me that accountability is the foundation of any system," I said. "You said shortcuts always surface. Now you want me to bury the evidence so he can survive the consequences." "That's not fair," he said. "It's precise," I replied. "You're asking for invisible labor, for loyalty without recognition, for silence in exchange for proximity." Nicholas stood. "If you walk away now, everything we built together will fracture." I rose as well. "What we built depended on integrity. I won't trade that for access." He looked older when I left. I walked out knowing exactly what my refusal would cost them. What happens when reality stops cooperating with appearances? The first call came from a client Damien trusted to stay quiet. "We're freezing the deployment," the operations director said. "Until Marjane signs off?" "I'm not in that role anymore," I replied. There was a pause. "Then we freeze." By the end of the week, 3 more followed. Different industries, same message. No escalation, no threats, just refusal. Inside the company, the exits began to whisper before they spoke. Daniel Cho, one of the senior engineers, left his badge on my desk. He didn't send a goodbye email. "I can't keep approving things I know are unsafe," he said when I called him. "This isn't engineering anymore, it's theater." 2 others resigned within days. Quietly, no announcements. Their absence did more damage than any headline could. The board finally requested a full audit review. Not because they wanted truth, but because they needed an explanation that held. The audit trails did their job. Approval chains compressed beyond policy. Compliance signatures missing. Emergency overrides stacked without justification. Each shortcut dated. Each decision owned. Damien sat through the review without interrupting. When he spoke, his voice sounded different. "We were moving fast," he said. "The market demanded it." A board member leaned forward. "The market did not demand that you bypass internal controls." Another added. "Clients demanded oversight. You removed it. No one mentioned my name. They didn't need to. The record spoke clearly without me." Later, Nicholas called. "They're restructuring leadership responsibilities," he said. "They want you involved again." "Involved how?" I asked. "As a consultant, transitional authority. Authority without accountability," I said. "That's not involvement," he sighed. "Damien doesn't have the room he thought he did. He spent it," I replied. "Confidence is easy to burn." The next morning, the investor briefing shifted tone, less vision, more caution. Damien's updates grew shorter, fewer promises, fewer smiles. Trust did not collapse loudly. It withdrew. And when it did, there was nothing left to perform with. Do you really lose something if it cannot function without you? The board didn't ask me to return to my old title. They offered something safer. "Advisory authority," Charles said, sliding a document across the table. "Limited scope, clear boundaries." I didn't touch the paper. "You're asking me to stabilize what you chose not to protect." Nicholas looked at me with tired eyes. "The company will survive," he said. "Smaller, more cautious." "I know," I replied. Survival was never the issue. Damien wasn't in the room. He hadn't been for weeks. His name still appeared on org charts, but decisions no longer passed through him. That was how his influence ended. Not with a scandal. With absence. I declined the offer. Instead, I met with the people who had quietly reached out while everything was shaking. Engineers who wanted to build without shortcuts. Compliance leads who refused to sign lies. Clients who said the same thing, again and again. "We trust how you work," one of them told me, "not where you sit." The company recalibrated without me. Contracts were revised. Ambitions narrowed. The $5 billion narrative softened into something more modest and more honest. What I carried away wasn't confidential data or leverage. It was alignment. The systems I built lived on in principle, even when rewritten elsewhere. The people who mattered followed clarity, not logos. Nicholas called one last time. "I wish I'd handled it differently," he said. "So do I," I replied. "But wishing doesn't repair foundations." He didn't argue. When I started again, it wasn't with a launch announcement or a press release. Just a small team, clean rules, and the same discipline I had always believed in. Reliability before speed. Accountability before praise. The lesson I took with me was simple and costly. Confidence can open doors, but only integrity keeps them standing. Titles fade, narratives change. What endures is the work that holds when no one is watching.